Good afternoon, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. I'd like to call to order the Administration Committee meeting. Let's do a roll call, please.
Supervisor Long.
Here.
Supervisor Cook.
Present.
Supervisor Ard.
Present.
Supervisor Peterson.
Here.
Supervisor Peavy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. As far as our minutes on Tuesday, December 15th, did anyone have any comments or changes or corrections? Hearing none, the minutes will stand as published. Public comment. So I believe that we will have some public comment tonight. I would ask, I'm not going to limit you to 2 minutes, but I would certainly ask that you please keep your comments as short and concise as you possibly can. Do we have any public comment for this evening? Okay, going once, going twice, public comment? Okay, let's move on to our business items. First, I'll turn it over to our newly anointed county administrator, Mr. Witt.
Thank you, Chairman Long. When we take a look at the financial report, these are the December numbers. You just have to remember that at the end of the year, we book a lot of things back to December, so there'll be additional expenses and revenues that show up into the final end of the year numbers before we really wrap it up, probably about mid-March. Most of the departments are looking pretty good. I did want to point out, I'm going to slide this box over so we can see the numbers better. So 1420, which is the county clerk. Sorry, Cindy, you get picked on first. We do see a negative amount there. The expenses were in line, but what we see is a decrease in the amount of revenues. So the clerk's fees charged for the year were down. It's not likely that we're going to make that back up at this point. And so when we talked about the effects of COVID on the financials for the county, we mostly talked about expenses, but there are a few instances where it did affect our revenues, and this is one of the places where you're going to be able to see that. So while we were able to recover a lot of the expense items we had related to COVID, there was nothing within the programs that the state or the federal government had that affected our revenues or lost revenues. So this is one of those areas where we can see the impact of that. I'm going to move on then to 1538. So most of these departments are all fine. So 1538, this is the retirement health savings. This is on the agenda later, but this is where you can see this when you look at the reports every month. This is that amount that's paid out when employees retire. And so when we have a year where we have a lot of the higher compensated employees and employees with longer years of service, we ended up negative $379,000 in this fund for the year. And then if we look at Fund 1540 or Cost Center 1540, this is the liability insurance. So this is negative for the year also. So we're falling at about a negative $89,000 there. The one thing that's different in the liability insurance fund this year than other years, we had a $300,000 settlement on that property along the river. So that was a larger than normal expense. That's not a typical expense that we end up with. So being negative $89,000 with that $300,000 additional expense would put us back to about average where we are. And that is all the things that I had to point out on the financial statements, but I'd be happy to entertain any questions for things that you saw within the statements.
Any questions? Okay, we got to keep an eye on Scotty in case she raises her hand. I don't want to forget about you.
She looks good so far.
Okay, let's move on to business item number 2, consideration of tax deed bids. This looks familiar. We did talk about this property, I believe, in December. So looks like there's an update.
Yep, and County Clerk Campbell is online.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Cindy, go ahead.
Okay. So yes, last month we did receive 3 bids on this property. It's a house in Glenwood City. This month I received 1 bid on the property, and it is from Judson Manor. The bid was for $13,500 with 10% down. The cost sheet has been updated in the packet. I believe it's on page 61. And what's owed to date is $12,478.36. There was some information in the packet as well regarding the condition of the house from one of the bidders from last month. And then, the property, surrounding property, there is a couple of houses that are vacant around this property as well.
Questions? At least a little bit better than last December.
I guess my personal thought would be, sorry, I'll wait for recognition there. Okay. Yeah, my thought is that, if we have 12 something into it and we get a bid for 13, put it back in the tax rolls, I'd support that.
I had another thought. It would be nice to know that somebody was going to purchase the property and actually fix it up for the neighbors in the neighborhood. I was curious about the possibility of actually making the acceptance conditional upon somebody who's actually going to improve the property. Is that unusual, or was that a possibility? I guess that would be a question for Corporation Counsel.
Well, you've kind of stumped me on that one. I've never seen it, so it's unusual, and I've been involved in property sales like this for 25 years. I don't know that it's a downright no, you can't do it, but what would be the enforcement in the event that the person decided to, let's say, level the house and start anew? I think it's it might be fraught with some problems, and the statute actually contemplates a sale. It doesn't provide any contingency. I just don't know whether we would be able to enforce that.
Sounds like we don't want to go there.
That would be my advice.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Supervisor Hard.
Thank you. It has been my experience in dealing with tax deed properties and the persons who are purchasing them that generally the condition of the house, and it appears that this property may be past the point of any renovation, that they would take this down to raise the home and create a new property, which would more than likely have a significant tax value for the city and the county. So if we have a bid which covers our costs, it would be our due diligence to accept that bid.
Supervisor Peterson.
I move we accept the bid.
Second.
Any further discussion or comments? Okay, all those in favor of accepting the bid signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you.
It'll get nice to get back on the tax roll. Okay, next item is number 3, review county standards of acceptable conduct. I just lost my place here. This was on the agenda as a result of a request from Supervisor Fiedler on the last board meeting. There was some concern that possibly unelected or appointed people on committees or boards were not subject to code of conduct or code of ethics. And we received some information and some suggestions on some things that we might want to consider. A couple things I do want to point out, and I'll make some suggestions. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but the code of ethics does apply to existing non-elected board members, appointed members, and basically all employees of the county as well as supervisors, all of us. So we do have a document. This is, I think it's County Ordinance 90, if I'm correct, that does cover the vast majority of the items that were covered in the document that had been submitted to us for consideration via email. So there, I think when I reviewed both documents, there was a fair amount of redundancy between the two. And so my first suggestion would be that if we are going to make any changes or additions, I think that it would probably be best to do that within the Code of Ethics itself. That way we don't have two competing documents with the possibility of inconsistencies or conflicting provisions in the document. So my second suggestion would be, and I know that we're all aware that we've been going through this process of updating policies and procedures for the county. So I guess my second suggestion would be that we put the Code of Ethics in that queue to have it reviewed to see if there are any appropriate changes or updates that we feel like we feel that it's appropriate to make to that Code of Ethics, so that we do end up with one controlling document that covers everything that we believe it should cover. So with that, I'll open this up for comments and suggestions, please. Supervisor Peavy.
Yeah, I think your suggestion is a good start. Difficult issue to deal with, but by having Chapter 90 as part of our review when we do the bylaws, I think we can cover any complaints or concerns that people have. So I think what you suggested would be a good way to proceed.
Supervisor Peterson.
I agree with Mr. Peavy.
Any other comments? Yes, Supervisor Cook.
I agree with your suggestion as well, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering, I have a question, if we were to put it into the queue, what does the queue look like as far as other pending review and, policies or codes that we are reviewing right now? Is that something that I'm assuming Human Resources would consider, or what would the process be for that?
No takers. So typically with an ordinance, so this is an ordinance, so you'd look to see which is the committee of jurisdiction, which would probably be the administration committee. So it would be this committee that ends up reviewing it. What we would do is we would start with corporation counsel, usually on an ordinance. And so they would review and make any recommended changes for you. You would have a chance to review that draft, make any recommendations or ask questions that you may have on that draft that's been provided by staff, make suggestions, and then that gets forwarded to the full county board for approval once it meets with an acceptable standard for you. So, and every ordinance is a little bit different because they would have a different committee of jurisdiction, but for this one, I would believe administration would be the correct committee.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. When I was listening to Chair Long, I was thinking, as we were talking about the process we've been going through for updating policies, that it would follow that, but because it's an ordinance, would go through the traditional process of updating and reviewing an ordinance. Okay, thank you.
And I think that would also, follow the right process and also provide ample opportunity for public input and suggestions to make sure that we feel like we're covering all the different scenarios that there were a couple different in the document that was provided to us that via email, there were a few other areas that were covered under that document that were not necessarily covered under the Code of Ethics, and that's something that we could, then consider as to whether it's appropriate or not. Do we need to vote on this? Not quite sure.
Yeah, I think what you can do is you can request that it be on the next agenda and that Corporation Council reviews it prior to that with any recommended changes that they have. That would be the first step in the process. I mean, so we can either just do that or you can make a motion to that effect, whichever your preference is, really.
No, go right ahead.
I guess I feel comfortable if, us directing, Administrator Witt knows what we're asking him to do, so, yeah, if we don't need to vote on it, I don't really care either way.
Maybe ask the question, does anybody disagree with that approach? Okay, one more thing on Corporation Council's plate. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to number 4, a resolution approving the a $25,000 contingency fund for We Made a Difference Small Business Recognition Program.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Long. So we have, last month we had discussed doing something for the business community that had followed the requirements from public health and the CDC. So I said I would bring back something that would be actionable for you to vote on. And so what we did was we created a program, and everything is modifiable within that, but it's a starting point for you to consider. I did put a dollar limit on it of $1,000 per business, $25,000 total. I think that would work out okay when I looked at, and I think it's in the packet, the business numbers. There was about 400 businesses that would qualify based upon the size limitations we had for the businesses and the NICS codes for those businesses. So we limited it to who would be eligible for it, so that manufacturers wouldn't be eligible for it. So it's primarily the industries that have suffered the most during the pandemic. It's directed only towards the small businesses, and it's a reward for having followed the procedures. And we're asking them in the application to spell out what it was that they did. And it does become subjective then as to who you're awarding that to. They fill this out, the application out, explaining what they've done. And then the administration committee is going to award that grant then to up to 25 businesses. So this is an actionable item. A couple of the areas, though, that I do still have concern is that subjective nature, that you're giving it to some, you're not giving it to all. The other part is it's really retrospective at this point. We're not changing anyone's future behavior with this. If we had done a program like this maybe at the beginning of the pandemic and said if you stay compliant with all the terms, you'll get something at the end, that helps change the behavior to help promote safety features. This one is really only looking backwards. And by the time we get into March, when these awards would be made, hopefully we're getting a lot closer to the end of the pandemic than we are to the start of the pandemic. So those are some of the drawbacks that I do see with it. The positive sides are that it is targeting the businesses that we had talked about last month of needing additional assistance, and it does have a dollar limit on it for the county's perspective, that we know exactly how much the program would cost. So there's pros and cons to it. So I'm not bringing this to you with a strong endorsement. This one's more of a neutral for me. So questions, input?
Supervisor Cook?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kenneth, thank you for putting together something based on my kind of thinking out loud comments at the last at the last meeting. I know we didn't get a lot of direction. I think there's some good value here. I have a question. You mentioned your concern about the subjective nature of the selection. When the county, let's see, now can you remind me when we had made awards before to businesses, how did we minimize that subjective nature last time?
Yeah, we did the loan program. So in the loan program, we used the regional business loan fund in order to do that. So there was a cost of about, I don't know, roughly $300 per loan application that they reviewed. So there's additional costs. So on a $1,000 grant, I wouldn't necessarily want to pay the $300 fee to have it reviewed. So I did leave it as an administration committee award determination. And a grant is a lot different than an award also, because the criteria you're looking at is not dollars and cents. Is this business viable that they're going to be able to stay in business and repay a loan? This is, did you comply with the terms, and how did you comply with it? So if we have 30 applicants that met all the terms, you know, which 25 were better than those 5 that are not? That's where it becomes very subjective, and one of the areas that I have the biggest concern over. So you could solve that by just increasing the dollar amount, but I don't necessarily want to go to $400,000 either. I wouldn't want to recommend something with that high of a dollar value.
Supervisor Peterson?
I guess I would kind of mirror that concern that you know, we might be hurting more feelings than that if we go in, especially if the administration committee is picking the winners, so to speak. We could be setting ourselves up for maybe looking political. I don't know. It's just my thought.
Yeah, I guess I do have some concerns myself. I like the idea, the fact that what we're really trying to do here is to reward good behavior rather than punishing bad behavior. But at the same time, the subjectivity concerns me, and I'm afraid that there'll be other businesses that will feel slighted if they didn't have the capital or didn't have the means to follow the guidelines as well as even if they had wanted to. And I'm just concerned that there might be consequences that would not be favorable, and that might kind of mitigate what we're trying to accomplish. Other comments? No, I'm sorry. Okay, any other comments, discussion? I guess I'd be most, I'd like to hear from Supervisor Cook again about our concerns. Since this kind of came out of, your ideas. So.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I know that there are a lot of businesses that had challenges following some guidelines for financial reasons. And so one of the reasons that I brought this forward was ideally to help businesses be able to work with the county as a partner. I know it's the way we have it set up right now. It's rewarding businesses that did already comply. I guess it sounds like there's some concerns here, and I do have some concerns about the subjective nature as well. Would want that to be as minimal, of course, as possible. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to, I don't know if would vote on this going forward, but there's an opportunity to maybe table it or take another look at it and see if there's other options for us versus going forward at this point, if we even need to table it. I would like to just have some additional conversation with staff potentially and maybe some more brainstorming before bringing it forward for consideration.
I actually thought maybe another alternative, kind of going down the same road, but not quite as an award, but maybe there's a way that we can at least highlight certain businesses that have been successful in a way that they might be able to provide information to other businesses as to how they were able to handle the pandemic, and more on a just highlighting success as opposed to an actual, a dollar award. Mm-hmm. It might be a possibility.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Supervisor Ard.
I think this idea has a great depth. And to the businesses in St. Croix County that truly are struggling, and there are many, this award could be, it could make a difference. However, I agree with Supervisor Cook that perhaps this item should be allowed on the February agenda so that it allows time for further discussion. Contacting chambers of commerce to find out from the chamber directors, what have businesses been talking about? What are they looking for? Have they gotten information regarding, or have they shared information with how they have been dealing with the pandemic and with their own business environment? The chambers may give us a great deal more information that could assist us in developing this type of a program so that we're not stumped as to how to actually award the program.
Well, I guess in that vein, I would make a motion to postpone consideration of the resolution until the administration can investigate other options and alternatives to accomplish the same goal. Does that sound reasonable?
Do we need to postpone to a certain time, or can we do it indefinitely and not kill it, or what? Maybe Corp Counsel advise us there.
Okay. Am I mute? Sorry.
No, I can hear you, Scott.
All right, so you don't have a motion on the table, so there's nothing to postpone. I think you can, by consensus of the board, simply agree to have it on the agenda for next month without taking any formal action.
And
In order to postpone something, you have to have something on the motion. You have to have a main motion on the table, and you don't.
We don't. Well, in that vein, would there be, I see a lot of nodding heads, so would there be consensus in taking that approach and revisiting next month? Okay, nodding heads have it, so thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is consideration of creating Government Center Building Subcommittee. So this was actually a homework assignment that Administrator Witt gave me a couple days ago. So I came up with a recommendation in terms of the composition of what I thought might be a reasonable committee or subcommittee of the administration committee to get pulled together to start looking at the space planning needs that were reviewed, I believe, last August, or July, and figuring out how we need to go forward with that planning. So I chose the following. Obviously, our County Board Chair Peterson and myself Supervisor Connor has a lot of interest and a lot of background and experience in construction, so he was very, very interested in getting involved in this project. Supervisor Anderson, that will be Paulette Anderson. She was involved in the highway construction project, I believe. And Supervisor Fiedler, who happens to be Chair of the Public Protection and Judiciary, and they obviously are going to have a big say in how we move forward and one of the driving forces, as well as our presiding judge or designee and support staff from the county. So the main question is, does that seem reasonable as far as a recommendation in moving forward? Supervisor Peavy?
Yeah, I was just wondering if the county support staff, is that the 3 people you recommend? And why I bring that up is, I was wondering if we should have somebody from highways. They just completed a $27 million expansion on time, under budget. So under the county support staff, I would recommend either Todd Renault or Rob Creechy, whoever's more available, to add to that county support staff.
Yep, absolutely. You know, we could have the finance director on there also, because there'll be bonding involved. So there's different support staff at probably different points in the project, so absolutely.
Yes, Supervisor Peavy.
Do we motion to approve that committee that way? Oh, I lost it on my screen. Is that a actionable item? If it is, I would so move.
Then second, Supervisor Peterson. Any further discussion or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you.
I have just one follow-up question, and that's what's your expectation for a timeline for that subcommittee? So I understand, you know, when we should be meeting and what kind of time frame we would expect for a report back to the administration committee.
Good question. I guess I would say, I would suggest sooner than later, even knowing that I'll be gone next month, but.
So maybe just a little later.
Should I don't know. Supervisor Peterson, do you have any thoughts on that?
So get started in March and then kind of see how long it takes and, right.
As early in March as we can get the group together?
Yep.
Okay, that'd be great.
Because I really don't know if it's going to be a 3-month review that you guys end up doing or if it's going to be a year-long review. So I guess it just depends on how in-depth you get into the project and probably the speed at which it's necessary. So if you say, well, the project's really not needed for 10 years, there probably isn't a huge rush to get it done. But if the judge convinces you that, you know, this project needs to be started in 2 years, well, then we need to work on it a lot faster. So from my perspective, that's what I'm looking at as far as the speed of a report back to the administration committee, if that makes sense.
Supervisor Cook?
Yeah, and my question is the subcommittee's outcomes, is that going to impact the planning for the KIP going forward in the next few years too? Will that, are you anticipating that will be an influence?
What I try to do with the KIP is to cash flow that using existing cash when we finish the year in the black, take that extra cash, put it into the KIP and keep the KIP funded that way. The 60 million is going to exceed that capacity, so it's going to be a bond issue. So really it's an outlier on the KIP. So yes, it does affect the 5-year KIP plan, but it's an outlier as a bond issue, so it doesn't affect the cash flow of the KIP.
Okay. I guess we're ready to move on to number 6, the resolution authorizing a fund balance transfer. Ken, you're on.
Well, it was Leah's idea, so I thought I would offer it to her. So we had talked earlier about the RHS fund. So that's the Retirement Health Savings. When an employee retires, we pay out their long-term sick bank. When we have years where people that have a lot of years of service or higher compensation levels leave, we end up dipping in the negative. And there's been more of those than not over the past 5 years. We probably had 3 years that have been negative years as far as what we put into it and what we paid out of it. So we've been constantly transferring, well, not constantly, but those 3 years that it's happened, we've been transferring from the unassigned fund balance into the RHS fund to bring it back to zero, because you can't leave a negative fund balance, especially when it has no other revenue source coming into it. The only revenue source is tax levy, which we did increase for 2021. We went from 200,000 to 250,000. I can tell you though, 2021's outlay is probably going to exceed that again, because I know of some retirements that are coming up this year, which again are bigger dollar amounts. So in order to correct it, at least in the short term, we have the HRA fund. The HRA fund is a fund that we had created a number of years ago, probably more than a decade ago, as a subsidy to our health insurance plan. We had a high deductible, but we put money into an HRA, which is different than an HSA. It's an HRA. We put that aside for an employee, for every employee that was in the health insurance plan. One of the things with an HRA is that it maintains ownership with the county. It never becomes owned by the employee. So the county has always held these funds, and we have over $1 million in that fund. Well, we sunset the HRA portion of our medical plan. We went back down to a lower deductible, which negated the need for the HRA. So we stopped funding the HRA, sunset it, and we have the lower deductibles now. But we have this $1 million that's left over in the HRA. So considering that these are both, related to employees, related to health insurance expenses for them, because the RHS is required to be only used for future medical expenses by the retirees, it made sense to merge the now defunct HRA fund into the RHS, solving the RHS problem. Good idea, Leah. So that's where we're at. These are the numbers that we have. So there was 1.1 million left over in the HRA. After the current year loss, there would still be $792,000 fund balance in our new, now in the black RHS fund, which should cover us for at least another probably 3 years of higher payout amounts. So I think this will take care of that in the short term, and that allows us then to use our unassigned fund balance for what I like to use it for, which is paying for KIP projects and avoiding future borrowings.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the resolution authorizing the fund balance transfer.
I'll second that. Discussion. That was a good explanation. Do we have any comments or additional questions for Administrator Witt? Supervisor?
Makes sense to me. It makes sense to me.
Any other comments or discussions? Okay, let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor of the fund transfer and the resolution signified by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to number 7, resolution continuation of self-insured workers' compensation program.
This is actually a routine item. It comes up every 3 years, but we have to file with the state a resolution telling them that we intend to remain a self-insured workers' compensation program. Overall, the self-insured workers' compensation program does save the county money, so I recommend continuing that program.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the resolution, continuation of self-insured workers' compensation program.
I'll second.
Second. Any discussion? Somehow I didn't think so. All those in favor of the resolution, or the motion to approve the resolution, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, and we move on to the last item, the results of the National Community Survey, the National Business Survey. I think we had this on the December packet and for our review, and again on this month's packet. So I believe, Ken, I don't know if you want to give us a little background on where we're going to go with this.
Yeah, so just a couple of things about the survey. When you look at it, I did put it together, sort of a little table of content here to guide you to where to look for different pieces of information. The National Community Survey and National Business Survey also understand what the comparisons are. So this is a survey that's used to compare municipalities, both cities, villages, and towns and counties across the United States. So when we look at the National Community Survey, we're being compared to other jurisdictions that may not be quite similar. So whereas we score really high, I think, in a lot of areas, I think the people that live in St. Croix County really like the county that they live in, and you can see that reflected in a lot of the scores. There are some scores where we score lower. So when they ask how our bus service is, we scored really low on that because we don't have a bus service in St. Croix County. So you have to kind of, understand what it's comparing us to when you look at some of those items. If you look at the survey then, so it's broken into the different sections. So they begin with basically the total surveys. So they have a 95% confidence rate because this was a targeted survey. The National Community Survey was a targeted survey. So they hand selected who was going to get that survey and restricted the reporting to that. We did open it up then, but they kept those results separately. So they have a 95% confidence level in the survey results that we have on the National Community Survey. So if you see that, 78% of the public likes the way we handle parks, just as an example. I don't know if that's the right number, but so that's the number. That's within 5% of being accurate based upon survey results. So you can have some confidence in the results that are in that National Community Survey. The National Business Survey was an open-ended one, so they don't have that same confidence level rating because it's a self-selected if you wanted to participate, and every business was offered that opportunity to participate. The second part then goes into an analysis highlights, so it'll talk about more wordy-wise. It'll describe the results for you. Then it has some grids, and then it looks at where the higher and lower ratings are for you. There's a couple of pages with COVID-related questions directly. It has some benchmarking data, and then it has, 2/3 of the survey reports, these are kind of long reports, are just the individual questions and responses. If you really want to dive into the details, that's where you're going to see that. So that's what we have. What we're going to do with this then is we're going to use this as one of the tools when we get to strategic planning. So when we start our strategic planning, what we ask the county board is, well, what goals do you have for the county? Where do you want to see the county going? And one of the first questions the county board always asks me then is, well, what does the public think? All right, so we took care of that first. So we went out and we got the survey results. So we can give you some indication of what's important to the public when we start looking at that. So we'll use that as one of the pieces, and then we'll build back in additional public input parts into the strategic planning. So I don't want you to think that this is the only part, but we'll develop our strategic plan, and then we'll invite the public back in to evaluate that and sort of give us a grade or a rating on the direction of the strategic issues that you've identified, if that's the right direction then. So there will be another public part probably a couple steps into the strategic planning then. But that's where these survey results are going to be one of the foundational cornerstones of our strategic planning. So with all of that then, did you notice anything in here, or did you have any questions on the survey? I didn't really get into what any of the answers are, but I'll leave it at that.
Supervisor Peterson.
I could just make a comment, I guess, on, it was pretty obvious that transportation, as you said, all the way through was, almost nil. And I think that speaks to the, we have had that transport committee looking at, the issues, and I think we need to continue looking at them because transportation is a big problem in the county. A lot of businesses really feel that we should have better options for getting their employees to work, so I think it's something we need to be aware of.
Now, I did want to just point out, so Robbie doesn't feel bad, that transportation, and though it's scored low, it doesn't mean that the highway system we have in the county is poor. It actually, the interstate system and the highway system actually scores really well. There's other components of transportation, though, that we don't have, like a bus service, where we scored really, really low. I think 11% of the people liked our bus service, which surprises me, because we don't have one at all. But, so, when we look at transportation and it scored low on average, there's part of that reason behind that.
Thanks for clarifying that, because no way was I reflecting on the highway department. They're highly respected and they do an excellent job.
One of the things that I thought was really apparent, really from a very high level, is there seemed to be a lot of concern over being open and transparent and really engaging our citizens and the public and providing information. At least that's one of the things that I saw, that not only in the community survey, but particularly the business survey. So that was one of the things that stood out to me, our kind of lack of ability to reach our citizens, provide information, and really engage the public. So I thought that was really quite interesting. And yeah, I was really interested in Adam's perception on that as well. If he's here, are you here, Adam?
I am here.
Ah, there he is.
Yeah, so I'm online today. That was one of the main things that I took away from the survey as well. I was looking at, I definitely want to look and see where we're doing well, but I also want to look and see where we have areas for improvement. And communications is always an area that no matter how well you do it, there's room for improvement. I do look at the timing of the survey. So we did the survey really a couple months into my employment here. So really setting that foundation for a communication system throughout the county is going to take time. But this is a valuable survey because it's giving me insight into what's working and what's not working and what those areas are that we can improve. Looking at the overall communication, public information services, like once you start breaking down the percentages, the custom, I don't have the numbers in front of me, so, but the public information services as a whole, I believe was 60-some%. And then, let's see, what was it? The customer service, I think, was upwards of 80%. So we do have some really high numbers in there, but specifically around the transparency piece. And the survey was issued right in the middle of the pandemic, which people are getting information from all different places. If we had done the survey at a different time, we may see a little bit different results. But I like the fact that we did the survey when we did, because then it shows us under strain what can the county do and where can we improve. So that transparency piece is key. I'm factoring that into the website redesign that we're working on and my talks with the other departments on how we communicate what their needs are. And then looking at, from the business standpoint, what I'd like to do is work more with the EDC and work more with the chambers to figure out what their needs are specifically that we can't see within the survey and how best we can communicate to them.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And speaking of the EDC, I thought it would be good to, unless anyone has any objections, to share at least the National Business Survey results with that board as well. I think they would find it very interesting. Other comments? Yes, Supervisor Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your comments about the transparency and communication, I think, are significant, especially considering, as Administrator Witt has mentioned, this is just one piece of the public participation component of our strategic planning process. And I think there's probably an opportunity, and I guess I would look to Adam's expertise in this area. I participated in many comprehensive planning workshops and other planning things at the local government level where, the hope, I guess, is that citizens are participating in that process. And often there's just staff from that community and, maybe the consultants that are there and just very few citizens. So hopefully we can create a structure that, supports active participation throughout the strategic planning process, so we can actually get some input versus just a very small group of a community that usually attends those kind of sessions.
Yeah, so where I'm at with the strategic planning is we had bids last March. We had taken bids and we had identified the top 3. We hit right into the pandemic then and just sort of mothballed that project. I have contacted those top 3. They're updating their proposals if they needed to at all. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a Zoom interview with each of those 3 firms in order to determine which one we're going to award the contract to. So that's budgeted. That's not anything that needs any additional approval from administration. That's one of the goals I have for this year. So we're going to do it. But if you wanted to participate in those Zoom calls, maybe, I could invite you onto those so you could see what they have to offer and offer some of your expertise into what you'd like to see in the process.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments or discussion on the surveys? Okay, good, thank you. I think those results are going to be interesting as we go forward with the strategic planning. And engaging the public is certainly important for us. Okay, request for future agenda items. Oh. I know Scotty's requesting something right now. There we go. Okay, we'll try that again for, I don't know if you heard us, Supervisor Ard, but a request for any future agenda items. Oh, okay. Okay, am I on? Can you hear me? Not getting any nodding heads. Imagine that. Okay.
It's muted in there. You'll have to unmute it.
Mr. Chairman, we cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, we'll try this again. We were asking for a request of any future agenda items. Okay, hearing none, announcements and correspondence. I do have an item. I just wanted to mention that I'm actually going to be gone the month of February, but it does appear that we'll have some items for our agenda, so I think we should proceed with the February meeting, which was originally scheduled for the Tuesday the 16th, and we will be very ably led by our Vice Chair Supervisor Ard. Any other correspondence or items that we need to discuss? Okay, seeing none, 5:55, another record time. We are adjourned.